Hello, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Speakers, and I'm here today chatting to the amazing motivational speaker and mental health charity founder, Alex Staniforth. Alex, thanks for joining us today. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Jane. Great to be here as well. Thank you.
So first of all, tell me a little bit about your earlier life and your background.
Yeah, well, where to start, really? I guess I didn't come into speaking from a traditional background. I don't think many of us do. I'm 26 now. I live in Kendal in the South Lakes, but I was brought up near Chester. And I had a pretty average start, if I can call it that, really. It wasn't until I was about 9 years old that things really changed. And I had a mild form of epilepsy, which caused lots of other challenges at such an important age. I've had a stammer all my life. I was relentlessly bullied all the way through school. I suffered anxiety and panic attacks and hated sports. And when I was in my early teens, I really found myself. I found the outdoors, and that gave me a way to fight back, to confront all these challenges, really, and to keep finding what else I could overcome and achieve. And through my time at school, I had the goal to climb Everest, and never imagined at the time, on my very first hill walk in the lakes at 14, that 4 years later I'd actually be standing at the foot of Everest, about to make my first attempt on the summit. That didn't quite go to plan, but I guess in a nutshell, since then I've been able to share my journey as a motivational speaker, as an author of 2 books, as a charity ambassador, as a brand ambassador, and a founder of a mental health charity. So essentially my journey is about overcoming challenges through the outdoors, and now I'm lucky enough to share that, to help people to overcome theirs.
So tell me quickly, what happened on Everest?
I was there in 2014 when there was a huge avalanche that tragically killed 16 people. I'd spent 3 years training for Everest. I'd raised 35,000 in corporate sponsorship whilst doing my A-levels and washing pots in my local pub. Had to find a way or make one. But obviously the mountain doesn't care how hard you've worked or how hard you trained. And COVID has only treated us the same way. So I went back to Everest in 2015 when I was 19, and we were on the mountain just below Camp 1 when the earthquake hit Nepal. So we were trapped on the mountain for 2 days at Camp 1 with avalanches and earthquakes hitting us every half an hour. Luckily, I'm still here today. Had we not left base camp that morning, would probably be a very different story. But sadly, we lost 3 of our team, and obviously over 9,000 people across Nepal. And that really changed the whole direction of my journey.
So what changed? How did it change? Is that when you started sort of looking and writing and speaking about your experiences?
Yes. I think like every challenge, there's an opportunity. And from finding the outdoors at 14, I started to realize that we don't always get to choose our challenges in life, but we can always choose how we respond. And initially, when I came back, there was obviously a lot of trauma. This wasn't something I trained for. None of us could have trained for this, and same with the pandemic. But I'd already started speaking on a smaller basis. Before my first attempt, I carried. In 2012, I was an Olympic torchbearer, and that led to me being invited to speak to my old primary school about carrying the torch to inspire the kids. Now, with somebody with a stammer who has smashed up phones at home for the frustration of being unable to say my own name, somebody that has struggled with words beginning with C or K, which isn't ideal when you're from Kelsall and now live in Kendal, standing in front of hundreds of people would be your worst nightmare. But I started to say yes to things. I started not to settle for average and being defeated anymore. So I said yes. And speaking to those kids was one of the most empowering things I'd ever done, because I realized that I could do it. And actually speaking to hundreds of people was easier than speaking on the phone or one-to-one that I'd always avoided. So that was when my mindset shifted. And before Everest, a few weeks before, I was desperate for the funds, and I contacted Chester Business Club, and incidentally, their keynote speaker just pulled out. So there was a slot for me at their dinner, 100 serious, experienced business leaders, previous speakers, the likes of Ranulph Fiennes and Lord Sebastian Coe and prime ministers and things. And then there's an 18-year-old me completely winging it. But that experience, being paid for it for the first time, they think, blimey, this is cool. Actually, this is great. but it was the most empowering thing. I think every time I stand up and speak, I'm raising a middle finger to adversity, and being able to share what I've learned is a privilege. So that was when my whole approach shifted. And after Everest went pear-shaped, businesses naturally want to hear from different perspectives. And 2 disasters on Everest is something quite unique. Relates to change and uncertainty and adversity and mindset and so many things. So that's when inquiries started coming in, and over time I've built up that experience and started charging more, and now it's my full-time income.
Well, that's great to hear. Have you got any plans to go back to Everest?
Well, in my talks now, it's the first question I'm always asked is, would you go back? And I'm too young to say never, but it's just not yet, because on that journey I found a new path through UK-based endurance challenges and ultra running, which my mum is a lot happier about, and that's kept me close to home. I've realised I can make a bigger difference on home soil, and there's just no time to commit myself as much as I did back then. But Everest was just a step on that journey, I think.
Yeah. Well, a very big step as well. Now, one of the most requested talk subjects that we have coming in at Great British Speakers is largely around mental health, particularly as a consequence of lockdown. So aside from speaking, you've been very active around getting out and about, haven't you? Tell me more about what you do there.
Well, I'm always out in the hills and running and falling down them and taking on challenges, and that's never changed. But I think mental health is such a broad topic, and I think it's quite a noisy space as well, which I think is fantastic that there's so much awareness and so much happening. But I started speaking from a motivational perspective and found myself getting a bit lost and carried away and not really knowing where I fitted anymore, steering away from what I've always done. I mean, I'm no mental health expert, but what I can do is talk openly about my own challenges. I think having anxiety and depression and an eating disorder as a young man, and there's not many people my age who are talking about that on a larger platform, especially not from an adventure perspective, which is often seen as quite a masculine and quite a macho place to be. So it's about sharing that vulnerability, really. And I think that alone can open conversations. And if I can share some of the tools that have helped me through adventure, hopefully that can help others too. But I think with the outdoors, spending time in nature has always been my antidepressant. It's my natural health service, as I call it. And that led to starting a charity, Mind Over Mountains, in 2020, which is a charity to restore mental health through nature, combining hill walking with coaching, mindfulness, counselling, and inspirational speakers, and essentially giving people the tools that I've always had that they maybe can't, they don't have access to. And I think everybody deserves that. And that now has joined all the dots very nicely together, because I can only speak about my own experiences, but also help people to walk the walk. And all of my challenges are now raising money for the charity as well.
Very busy. Now, I know your latest venture is a 100-mile run. Now, some people were sort of thinking that you have to be some kind of superhuman to be able to take advantage of nature and do a 100-mile run. But obviously that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Not at all, really. I think it's all about mindset. Of course, some people are more naturally inclined to sport and endurance, but don't forget that, when I started school, I came second to last in cross country and PE. I hated sports. In fact, my first run came about when my stepmom put a €2 bet on holiday in France that I couldn't keep up with my dad, who was a marathon runner. But of course, I wanted that €2 because it's a lot of money when you're 13. And now 4 years ago, I did my first official marathon, and then back then I never could have imagined that I'd be trying to run 100 miles. But I think every time you push the bar higher, you increase that threshold, you increase that level of what's possible. And I think it's just about building that experience, really. There's so many brilliant examples of that. I know there's some great speakers like Michael McGrath and Aaron Phipps and Aid Adepatan and Claire Lomas, people that have push the boundaries, but would consider themselves as very ordinary people. It's all about mindset, really.
So let's move on to your latest talk, something we're hearing a lot about in connection to mental health, and that's burnout. Tell me how this talk came about exactly.
I mean, I've been speaking about mental health quite a lot over the years, and I think it was something I was being asked more and more about. Originally, I said I focused more on a motivational goal setting perspective, and it took me a long time to be comfortable with that. Things that previously I wouldn't have spoken about or would have had me in tears. I'm now able to talk about in front of hundreds of people because I realised that was an important thing to do because it could help others not to suffer in silence like I did. I think businesses are facing so many challenges, and they always want me to touch on other areas, as well as resilience, which is closely linked to well-being as well, and stopping burnout in the first place, because you can't really have one without the other. But I think I realized that burnout was probably the root cause of many of my mental health challenges, and something that can actually be avoided with proactive tools and strategies, whereas nobody chooses mental illness. I can choose to go on all these challenges and adventures, but mental illness doesn't discriminate. And I think burnout was something that was also incredibly relevant at the current time that I felt comfortable talking about. So I think naturally over the years, I just got asked more and more about it, and it just ties in so closely to what I do, really. One of the many challenges, probably the biggest challenge that I've had to overcome.
And is that your most requested talk now, or is it a bit of both?
It's always a bit of both. I think, as I said, businesses are facing so many challenges that you can't have good well-being and good without. So you can't have good you can't maintain high performance and motivation without well-being and avoiding burnout. So I think they all work very closely as one. But I think a lot of us have also been bombarded with well-being the last couple of years. And I am hearing now that businesses are wanting to think more about moving forwards, but equally they've got to have a nod to that self-care and well-being, because that is such a crucial element. And I think it's something that again links in very well to my more recent challenges and ultra running in particular. I often talk about a challenge and talk about a story on my 3 Peaks run when I fell asleep in a bus stop, which obviously then links into the whole thing around around boundaries and creating a healthy environment and priorities and saying no to people, which I think has all become blurred into one in the pandemic. So that's the approach I take, really, without just showing all the usual textbooks and kind of diagram stuff. But it's certainly something that comes up often.
And are you quite happy to sit with a client and discuss and modify your talk according to their audience and their employees and their needs?
Of course, I think it's helpful to have a shop window to give people an idea, but every organisation is on a different journey and different challenges. And as a perfectionist, I can't help sometimes wanting to tweak and change things, and even how you change a word can have a different impact on somebody. And that's where the time goes in, really, having a briefing to find out what success would look like for them, and to help them identify what their mountain looks like. So absolutely.
And making it truly bespoke to them. So have you an example where you've spoken to an organisation and they've moved forward with big changes as a consequence of your talk?
I think perhaps the hardest part about speaking is that you can have an impact and you can plant a seed, but not see the immediate response of that for years and years. It may just change how somebody thinks slightly, and then they've got to wait for the conditions and other circumstances to all line up before anything happens. But I think change doesn't happen overnight. We know that. But I do often get emails and comments and messages directly from people that really hit home. I did a session for an engineering company early last year during the pandemic, and my mantra about don't settle for base camp is something that they're still using in their meetings now, and they've been on a 3-year journey, and I've seen from their posts and comments that's something that they're still using now, and giving them something to take away that they can use as a reminder, I think is really powerful. And I think being asked to come back and speak to them again and again kind of speaks for itself, really.
And what gives you the biggest buzz?
Speaking is a bit like buses, it all comes at once, it's unpredictable. And I think I take that over a constant, predictable routine anyway, any day, really. I think people often ask me the whole thing about getting a proper job, whatever that means in the modern world. But it never feels
I'm still
like
getting asked it today, Alex. Let me tell you.
I've got plenty of time then. But I think when you get the chance to work with so many different people and places and learn about their challenges and see things from their perspective, and to look back at where I started I also have to pinch myself that now I'm being paid to share what I've learned. I'm being paid to overcome challenges, and every time I stand up, to be literally rising above, adversity and living true to myself. It's going home knowing you've made a difference is the ultimate job satisfaction, really, and I'm so grateful for that and looking forward to what's next.
Well, Alex, it's been absolutely brilliant chatting to you, truly inspirational. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to it.
And if you'd like to book Alex, simply contact myself or Steve at Great British Speakers on 01753 439 289, or you can email bookings@greatbritishtalent.com.